All right, it's time for a blast from the past. We got an interview with a superstar of kind of the 2005 through 7 era Stuff. Most commonly, I think, known as Stuff.com, but a member of various clans. For the background, I YouTubed Stuff, and a bunch of things came up, and then it said people also watch this video of satisfying video of workers doing their job perfectly. So that's what we're going to watch in the background. Hopefully that's a fun watch. I don't know. By Mad Lab, as you can see. Great. All right, interview. How would you describe your TT play or style? I would say I was a very intuitive player, especially on first turn. Often started out with what felt right before really starting to do any calculation, especially when I went second and had to react to a corner starter. Personally, always loved the slot 6 to 8 answers, 6 or 8 answers on slot 1 first moves from the opponent and stuff like that. So responding with far sides to corner starters. That often caused confusion in the opponent, since most of the player base always expected slot 5 answers. After that, mostly just solid gameplay, never felt the need to reinvent the wheel. This is something interesting. A bunch of great players from kind of 2005-6-ish, like Nimloth brought this up, of kind of playing these moves that are irregular and make it tricky for the opponent to handle and give them something they're not used to facing or have sort of planned to meet, right? Who is your most interesting opponent? In closed random games, Mafi Josie and Cookie. In open non-random games, I would say Seto. This is pretty similar to Turds' answer, actually, who has repeatedly mentioned Mafi Josie as a very creative and interesting closed player, and Cookie as well as someone who plans really well for his last cards. Obviously, Seto is, a master of the game. Who is your toughest opponent? Karmazin, often fastest way to give away some cards. I really like the players he's chosen to mention, because I first arrived in maybe mid-2008, so sort of the latter period, a lot of these players' time on the site. But when I first showed up, I sort of thought, it's just so clear Deli, Seto, and Karmazin are the 3 best players. And Karmazin might be the best of all, but I only see him playing open trade, but he seems to crush everyone at it. What if he's just the best? And so agreed, fastest way to give away cards. What formation or move type do you like more than other players do? This can be for either open or closed, or answer for both. I partly answered that one on the first question already. I would add to that, starting to build up potential combos with playing next to a corner starter without actually taking the card. Always loved playing mind games like that. This was something really interesting in the, I don't know if my video on starter stats is out yet, but you look at stats of how different starters have done in the open games I've kept track of, and playing next to a corner without taking it has scored very, very well. Favorite way to meet a corner starter, a side starter, a center starter. Center starters were mostly boring and ended up in ties in my opinion. Too many safe options on that more often than not. Side starters are interesting, especially when you can play in the opposite corner, for example, and force the decision to play in a starter corner on your opponent. Force the pressure of decision making on your opponent. So yeah, a lot of side starters are kind of built with the idea of like, I play the side, you take it, and I get to play the other side, locking in 2 cards, the side and the corner I just played. And playing in the far corner can sort of have them hold open that decision and make it a little tricky for them to, do they want to take that corner and let you play in the paired corner, or do they want to leave it open? And that can be, I think, a difficult decision to make. Do you have a preferred starter type? Does that change between random and hand games? Does it change between open and closed? It does change, for sure. Low corner starters are very interesting, especially on random games. The pressure of building up potential combos are always fun. Hand games are often more predictable to an extent, especially with experienced players having a game plan before move 1. What is your proudest triple triad moment? Clan Wars wins with Zodiac Braves and Divas. I think those were Clan Wars 4 and 6, if I remember right. So, quick pause to say, my records, which are far from perfect, say Zodiac Braves did win, Divas did win in Clan Wars 6. I think Zodiac Braves did win Clan Wars 4, but I don't have Stuff listed as part of the team for that one. It's perfectly possible he was. My guess is because he was part of the Clan League winning team with Zodiac Braves in Clan League 3. He may have also won Clan Wars 4 with Zodiac Braves, but I just don't have the record. So he definitely won at least Clan League 3 and Clan Wars 6. May have won Clan Wars 4 as well. Beating Nimloth to join boss originally. I mention that only with the hope that he reads this, because I know how much it would annoy him to see this mentioned again after all these years. Yeah, calling you out, Nimloth. Stuff crushed you. Should Delial be banned? Yes or absolutely. I can't agree on that one. Delial is my brother from another mother, and we can't take away his home on TTA. What else would he do? Should Elemental be abolished? Yes or immediately. No, it has its place. The place of being the worst rule ever implemented to the game. It should stay to get the hate it deserves. Never liked it when it was part of official game rule sets. Now, I'm very torn on this answer, because obviously the correct answer is immediately. But if you are going to keep it, perhaps keeping it as a monument to, the failures of human nature, to the worst things we've ever done, maybe it's important to remember these things. What clan or clans will always have a place in your heart? Brotherhood of Seed, my first love, my place to grow as a player amongst legends of the game. Zodiac Braves, the elitist club that always felt so good to be part of, and then Divas, which I enjoyed so much and have so many fond memories of, especially with the love-hate relationship I have with Meta and Caus Debonair. That's probably the order and the right priority. Player you think is most underrated? I thought long about that one. Obviously, old ego me would of course mention myself, but if I have to name someone that doesn't get mentioned enough, I would have to say Jadat. Good pick, yeah. Jadat's clearly one of the great players to have never won, but sort of faded out of some conversations, I think. And, just a fantastic player and a really creative one. One of many reasons I'm sad Jadat hasn't come back is because I don't have records of his games, and I always thought he was such a creative thinker, and it would be nice to have some of his kind of concepts on record, because they were ones that were just very different than how I think. And when I see good players that access the game differently than I do, it really makes me want to figure out tools to find moves like they find. And so he's someone I'd really love to have records of, more than almost anyone else. What are your top 3 to 5 picks for GOAT? I personally value longevity a lot, so for me, it's Delial and Seto. Excellent picks. This is our first mentions of Delial and Seto in the top slot, and it had been too long without having mentioned them. To see them still going so strong after all those years is just impressive. Karmazin was so good as well in my era, scary good. Kamikaze was very good at that time when he was into the game, and not lazy. I think I played the most against Meta, especially on the Triple Triad network. Super solid player that was just this well-oiled machine that hardly made any mistakes. Shout out to my early brothers, Cookie and Mafi Josie. Obviously, I missed a lot of players, especially the newer generation. I can just mention and judge about what I played and saw. It's interesting how many older players mention Mafi Josie. Because by my time, he was still active and clearly very good, but never really mentioned as, the absolute best or an elite player. But you go back to when he was more in his prime, and, in the early tournaments, he just makes the semifinals every other tournament. It's ridiculous. Everyone knows he's among the very best. When did you start playing, and what was your favorite era? I had my first account around 2003, I think. Played casually until I took the game more serious later on. Have good memories sitting in queue and learning for my diploma while doing so. That would have been 2005. Favorite rule set? Same plus random combo level 4 open. Keep it simple, doing the basics, like free throws. Yeah, I'm a basketball guy. Played the sport until my knees gave up on me. Same plus wall random combo level 4 closed for the good old gamble trade games for entertainment. So many games with Mafi Josie and Cookie on those rule sets as well. Interesting to be playing open without plus wall. I like, a lot of times, you see people who've played a ton of level 4, it's all non-combo, right? Because it's all layman, essentially. And this obviously isn't because it's with random on, but interesting to play with no plus wall. I very much default to using plus wall and really enjoy it, but it leads to a lot of different types of moves being quite effective. Like, it's a lot easier against, say, a center starter to play a side that is just very difficult for them to take, rather than corners. Sides become the moves that are more likely to have safety or create significant difficulties for opponents. And yeah, it's just, because a corner, right, there is one card, the card in 5, that impacts the corner card. And a side, there are no cards that impact it. But a corner, there is one wall that impacts it, and a side, there are 2 walls. So the more rules like same and plus there are, the more it is easy to take a corner against a center starter. And the more rules like plus wall or same wall there are, the easier it is to take a side. And so as same walls and plus walls are taken out of the rule set, different moves gain value in that they gain a likelihood to either be safe or to be difficult for the opponent to take. And so I find it really interesting when people play odd rule sets. You also see this with Grat, who would play like same plus wall random combo. Yevon's been putting up some interesting sets. So always interesting to see. Have you met any other Triple Triad players in person? Sadly not. Plans fell short to meet the German guys I used to play with. I'm Swiss, living next to the German border. What is your biggest weakness as a player? You can evade the question if you think it's targetable. My own ego. Interestingly, this is the second time we've gotten this answer, and the other was Nimloth, who importantly, as you may have heard, Stuff beat in his Brotherhood of Seed tryout. My own ego, especially in my younger days, my biggest advantage and weakness at the same time, never was afraid to play against anyone. But honestly, with some hindsight, I would have to say hand building. Not that I was bad, just if I had to pick something. I think that's rather a question for my peers at the time. They're the better judge for how good I actually was and what my flaws were. And then he added in a message after, the weakness question made me think it might be fun content idea to ask former peers or companions about an individual player. They're often the better judge of how good a player actually was and what his flaws were. Yeah, that's a really interesting concept. I think a lot of people would hesitate to say something critical, and I certainly, have more critical thoughts than I share in my videos because I feel it would be mean and not to any point. But someone like Turds, who I've talked a lot with and talked a lot about his play and his strengths and what he finds interesting in Triple Triad, I have been more open with criticism, but I also just know a lot more about how he plays than I know about how others play. I've seen a lot more of it. I've talked a lot more about it with him, so I'm better at having a sense for it. It would be really interesting, I think, to hear people talk about other players' strengths and weaknesses, ideally in a place where it wasn't like you've watched a video of me talking about someone and thus you're somewhat influenced to think in the categories I'm thinking in. It would be nice to hear, independent thoughts of where players are stronger and weaker and how good they are or how good they were. Was this a top 10 player? Was this a top 5 player? Was this a top 30 player? All very good, but clearly big gradations between those in strength. If you saw this player in the quarterfinals of a tournament, would you feel it was a nicer, tough pairing? Something like that. But that might feel mean, right? So maybe better would be, and this is more how he's saying it, where do you think their strengths and weaknesses were? And it doesn't have to be super comparative to anyone but them, but they were really tough in this kind of game. They were easier to beat in this kind of game. I would rather play them in, say, closed than open. Delial had a comment. I once asked him about, this is totally, selling out his private comments, but I once asked him about Jadat and Tezuka, and he thought they were both great players, really balanced, but he thought Jadat was tougher in closed and Tezuka was tougher in open, though also depends on what era, but in general, not knowing when you were playing them, he would be more worried about them in those formats. I thought that was quite interesting, and stuff like that, of just like, do you think you have better chance against this player open or closed, hand or random? What kind of moves did they do well? What kind of moves did they do poorly? Maybe that could be done in a really interesting way with people feeling free to say whatever they wanted. Because it should be pretty doable without it ever feeling really negative about someone. And so, yeah, this is an interesting idea. I think self-evaluation is tricky, and other people playing against you are going to have more insight of what to do, what they thought worked or didn't work against you. Yeah. So that's my interview with Stuff. I always think it's great to get responses from people, specifically before I played, because as you can probably tell on this channel, I talk a lot, and so I think there's a lot of discussions of especially 2009 to 2012. There's a lot of awareness of that specific era, maybe 2008 to 2013, if we extend it slightly, but not much else. Right, I have very limited feeling for 2013-14 through 2017. I just wasn't there. And of course, I was there even less before 2008. So I really appreciate when I get interviews with people who were around and are still interested in talking about their time on the site and their play. And I always worry, like, will they feel close enough to the game that they can answer questions about style? And so far, all of them have very much had opinions on certain types of moves and remembering rule sets and how they handled them and what they, did differently and interestingly. So I really love getting interviews like this, and I hope to get more. And every time someone shows up that's sort of a name from the past, hopefully I'll be good at, immediately bugging them in direct messages and asking them to do interviews, because I like getting responses. So thanks to Stuff for this one. And I won't have games to show of his unless sometime after I record this I spy him playing games and can stalk them. But I probably won't have games following this. This is probably just a one-off interview, but great interview, so hope you enjoyed.